All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining our meeting today. Local Government Lunch and Learn, Exploring State Contract Options. We have James Tanzosh and Debbie Patterson here from the statewide IT procurement office who will do a presentation for us. And we are so grateful to have them here today, taking time out of their busy schedule to come and be with us today. And we truly appreciate it. And James has the introductions there in front of our screen. So I am actually going to turn it over. And also, we thank Bob Blacksford for being here. Bob is going to be assisting as well with our questions and answers. So, James and Debbie, we'll turn it over to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Felina, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to our fellow co-workers across the state and introduce you to some of the items we're dealing with at statewide IT procurement and see if there's any opportunities for you to join with us in the world of procurement. And Debbie, I'll let you jump in here.
I'm Debbie Patterson. I am the Deputy Chief IT statewide IT procurement officer, as James says, over IT contracts and strategic sourcing. I have been with DIT for 20 years now and with the statewide IT procurement office for 19 of those 20 years. So looking forward to this presentation to give you kind of an overview of our state contracts and maybe ways that they can help you make your lives a little simpler. So thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you. And I get to do the first part of the presentation, but Debbie gets to do the key part. She's the star of the presentation. But I'll just say that one of the good things about this, or one of the things we want to do across the state, is start leveraging our buying power as a whole. So the more we can do things together, possibly and hopefully the better deals we'll be able to work with our vendor partners. So this presentation, the main purpose that we're trying to do is to just introduce and familiarize us with our local government agencies across North Carolina. I'll say that before I started working at NCDIT, I worked at NC Central, and while we're not quite a local agency, but I was outside of at least the agency part of state government, and so I understand, how beneficial we can do things at the state that can help you in your procurement practices. And we're going to try to do more and more stuff like that where we can partner together. Hopefully by the end of the session, we can give you an understanding of who is the statewide IT procurement office, what our statutory authority is, our role and responsibilities, and then we'll give you an introduction to statewide IT contracts, how you can use these contracts, and then where there's some links and how you can get familiar with those and what might work for you on those. So who is the statewide IT procurement office? So I think in 2015, we were formed as an agency, Department of Information Technology. Before that, we existed as sort of a separate agency. And when I talk to Debbie can probably give you more on the history, but we moved around, or we were a pseudo agency, and we worked on statewide IT procurement. But if you go back 20 years, IT was a lot different then, right? iPhones were a lot different. It's amazing where the technology has come in the last 20, 25 years, where technology has almost integrated everything that we're doing, especially when you're looking at even sometimes ventilation equipment or HVAC equipment can become technology because there's all kinds of technology embedded in them to share information. So the statewide IT procurement office is set up to sort of have a statewide, maybe governance, or we can sort of give an idea of how we can use this technology and also how we can use it together across the state. So the technology is both good and bad. Information is the key. Information has become increasingly more important and more valuable in our world. I didn't know this, but just if you have a dash cam in your car, all that information from the dash cam goes back most likely it goes back to the company that you are doing your dash cam with. Nowadays, with AI, that company can take all that video and put it into their AI tools. And now they're trying to sell the data back to us so we can determine where there's potholes on the road and where there's bridges that need work to be done on them, or where we have guardrails that are damaged. That's how that information is getting shared. But if you think about it, that information probably also has everybody's license plate numbers. They know what cars they're driving, what cars are moving around. There's all kinds of information you can get with that. And so that's where information technology, or our department, becomes increasingly more important. And the contracts we have for information technology becomes even more important, because we want to make sure that companies aren't using the data that they're collecting for us as we work in nefarious ways. And we want to help make sure that data that you're collecting has terms and conditions that protect the taxpayers and protect each of us as citizens, to make sure that that data is being protected and is not being used incorrectly. So here's a general statute that gives the procurement of information technology, and it gives us oversight over all of that technology for goods and services. And as I said, I think as we look at data, it becomes increasingly more important that we have some oversight, and there is some oversight, and we all work together to have some governance over the technology that's in our world. So what is the role of statewide IT procurement? We provide the oversight for government entities to help make sure that you're doing it the right way. And we primarily work with the state agencies, but there's also things we can do to help more local agencies. We have a great team member on our staff, Melinda Williams. She has done some classes for procurement across the state. She's part of NIGP, and she is wonderful. And we want to do more stuff like that, more trainings, more abilities for us to share the wealth of knowledge. Debbie mentioned she had 20 years. We have the amount of knowledge on the team just amazes me every day. We've got a number of employees with 20 to 30 years or more experience, and Debbie will introduce some of them on this call. And we are just very lucky and fortunate as a state to have this just great knowledge base to help us. I don't think our state would be in the position it is if we didn't have this knowledge. And I don't think we realize even how beneficial it's, because across the country, cities like Minnesota, our cities like Minneapolis, I think the state of Wyoming and a few other states, a lot of times you don't hear about this, but they've all been hit by ransomware attacks. I know the Minneapolis government really couldn't function for 3 or 4 weeks. A lot of what we do in procurement is we help and we work with security to prevent that from happening and to get products that minimize those damages. And they tell me everybody's going to get hit. It's not a matter of when or if, it's just a matter of when. But when we do get hit, we want to make sure that we can minimize any damages there. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect the state with our responsibilities. So we're given the role to establish IT contracts across the state and for government entities. And then we approve contracts for state agencies. So we make sure all those contracts have the correct review, they're vetted, and the proper authority and protection of data that's in there. We also are working to set up more processes and standards so that the products that are getting sold are meeting the right guidelines. And then we review state agency procurements to make sure that they're covering legal pieces. The reviews that we have are project management review and architecture review. So architecture is just how are we hosting that data? Is it hosted in a state site? or is it on a vendor site? And if it's on a vendor site, we want to make sure that it's adequately protected. And then one of the key things we're doing, and one of the reasons we're excited to be on this meeting, is to build a rapport with agencies to see how we can work together more when we're purchasing IT products. That goes hand in hand with education. And then the final thing that's core to all procurement, I mean, procurement really means that we operate in a transparent method so that everybody has a fair and equitable, transparent chance to take part in procurements. And I think before you had procurement, if you go back 30, 40 years, everybody hears about backroom deals and, things would happen. And I've certainly been to conferences where I've heard stories of deals that took place and the procurement officer might have got, or somebody along the way was kind of in on the deal, or maybe it was a relative's company. We're there to make sure backroom deals and things like that don't happen, and that it's a fair way, and taxpayers, we're making the best use of taxpayer dollars and giving every vendor a fair chance. So in summary, if you're a non-exempt state agency, you're required to follow the IT procurement office. I think for the folks on this call, you're exempted agencies. You don't have to follow us, but there's a lot of benefits you can get, especially if we can partner together and take some of the contract pieces out of there for you. We can be beneficial for you. I know when I was at NC Central, many times when we talked with a vendor who was unwilling to closely follow North Carolina terms and conditions, we really had no power to say, hey, you need to follow these North Carolina rules, especially when we're talking about liability and responsibility if the contract goes bad. Well, if there's a state contract in place, some of that's already done for you. And we took advantage of state contracts whenever we could. As can local government agencies in some case. So with that, I think I get to turn it over to Debbie. And at this point, are there any questions? Because I don't see any in the chat, but if you have one, throw it in the chat or go ahead and just speak up.
I was just going to say, I loved your last slide, James. The may use the contracts. I even think of it as entitled to use. Where words are so goofy these days, but I loved that you had that call out for the exempt state agencies and just clarified at that point. It's just always one that I know is an FAQ, and I love that you called out the value that you can get if you do choose to leverage it.
No, thank you, Jamie, and your team has always been very helpful in helping us get that word out.
So I wanted to introduce you to a fantastic team of women who work with strategic sourcing team members. They are all IT strategic sourcing specialists. We have a combined knowledge of, I think, knowledge and experience of over 50 years with just that group with statewide IT procurement office. And if you throw me in, it would be 70 years. So Jenny Elias is on the team. She's got 20 years with SITP. Allison Howard is 8 years. Sandra Rosser, 19 years. Beverly Satterfield joined us a year ago. We also have Melissa Anderson and Renee Schumacher. Both of them are coming up on 2 years. Just a tremendous group of women who manage these contracts and are great resources if you have questions about the state contracts. So basically, basic information, how do you find our contracts? A lot of times people have issues trying to locate where our contracts are. I'm not going to have James click the link, but we can provide this slide deck afterwards. But it gives you the link to our state contracts page. And I just did a little screenshot to show you what the page looks like. It will list all the contracts in alphabetical order, give the contract number, the start and end dates. abnormal quantity provisions, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and also gives you the information links to the contract administrator. So which statewide IT contracts can be used? So I've kind of grouped this up into the different types of contracts to give you an idea of what essentially you guys can use pretty much every state contract that we have. But I wanted to just kind of give you a little overview of the different types of contracts that are available. Not going to go into deep dive on the contracts, but just give you a general overview of each contract. So you have the 204N for hardware contracts. The first one would be 204N, which is our Apple contract. That's for Apple equipment, peripherals, and services. That is a direct contract with Apple, and it is actually part of the NASPO cooperative agreement. So we use the NASPO cooperative purchasing agreement for our Apple state contract. And again, that would be direct with Apple. We also have the 204X contract. That's for IT infrastructure solutions. That is a massive contract. That's going to cover all server, storage, networking. There are 32 OEMs represented on that contract. And so you're talking about like Cisco, Extreme Networks, NetApp, HPE, Dell, just to name a few. So that contract, if you go to that, it will provide you a list of the vendors that are included under that contract. We also have another NASPO contract that we use. It's the 4410A contract. That's for mailing equipment, supplies, and maintenance, and that is with Pitney Bowes. The 204A contract, which I think most of the local governments are probably very familiar with, that's for microcomputers and peripherals, and that contract is awarded, the awarded OEMs are Dell, HP, Lenovo, Microsoft, and Acer. We also have a variation of that contract, which is our 204B contract, and that's for the ruggedized version of the devices. So that contract, those are primarily ones that would be used like field by your law enforcement or people that work in the field. Those are just the durable equipment. And that's got Dell, Durabook, GTAC, and Panasonic are the awarded OEMs on that contract. And to kind of answer Walter's question as far as Lexmark, so they would be a vendor on the 204D contract. That contract includes multiple OEMs, and that's for printers and peripherals for purchase or lease. And the vendors on that one are Canon, HP, Konica Minolta, Kyocera, Lexmark, Ricoh, Sharp, Toshiba, and Xerox. It is a little bit of a unique contract with Lexmark devices are actually sold through Toshiba Business Solutions. Lexmark had named them as their single authorized reseller for that contract. And HP and Konica Minolta devices are actually sold through Sistel Business Equipment. So there's the single vendor for that contract. Hopefully that answered your question for Lexmark. For 725G, that's our two-way radio contract, heavily used by a lot of local governments for also for law enforcement. So that has multiple OEMs like Motorola, et cetera, would be included on that contract. And I also wanted to kind of call out a program we have that is available for the local governments, and that is our PCIT Volume Purchase Initiative. And that one is a one-year contract that the state does where we set standards for desktops, workstations, laptops, monitors, and associated peripherals. We bid it out and we award configurations for each vendor. So it's a fixed price for a year. Our new contract goes in place tomorrow, October the 1st. The contract pricing will be effective through September 30th. I provided a link to that. I know several local government entities have used that in the past, but it gives you fixed pricing and standard configurations for a year. So I would always encourage you to check that. Even if you're configurations are slightly different. A lot of times you're buying the same monitors and peripherals, so you should be able to take advantage of that better pricing. That contract is direct through Dell and Lenovo. HP has a reseller that fulfills that contract, Applied Data Technologies, and Microsoft has several resellers that they use to fulfill the contract. So good information. And I see stuff popping in the chat around 725G. So I'm not sure if Code Blue emergency phones are the manufacturer name. That is not a specific manufacturer on the contract. There are multiple devices on the contract. If you want to take a look, Gary, let me know, is that a manufacturer name, Code Blue? Because I'm not familiar with that specific name of a manufacturer if it is, but I don't recall that one being on the contract, but there are a multitude, like 7 vendors on it. I'm just not familiar with that specific one. And would radios for K through 12 be purchased under 725G? If you're using a two-way radio, then that would be an option that you could use the 725G contract for that. I'm not sure exactly what your use case is or what specifically you're using, but if it is a two-way radio, then yes, you could use that contract. Okay. James, next slide. Go back one, if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay. So for software contracts, we have a multitude of software contracts that are available. We do have the 208S contract, and that's for commercially off the shelf or COTS software. That is on-premise software. There are multiple vendors or OEMs awarded on that contract, and it is through a single reseller through SHI. So you can take a look at that contract. I know there's a lot of vendors on it. Adobe, Trellix, I think Red Hat is on there, just a multitude of vendors that you can check for that contract as well. But it is not for cloud solutions. It is for on-premise solutions only. We also have 208E, which is for our electronic digital signature contract, and that would be Adobe Sign and DocuSign. And both of those contracts are available. 208M, which is for endpoint protection, so that's antivirus, malware, that type of software. Multiple vendors on that contract. We have Broadcom, Sophos, Trellix, which I believe replaced McAfee. CrowdStrike and Cisco all offer solutions on that contract through resellers. We have our ESRI, our Geographical Information System, or GIS contract. That is direct through ESRI. That's 208K. Local governments can use that if they have a need for GIS software. We have 2 Microsoft agreements. 208C is our enterprise software agreement, and 208H, which is our Microsoft State and Local Government Select Agreement. Difference being, obviously, C is for an enterprise agreement where you're purchasing a lot of licenses. 208H would be a one-off purchase. So if you needed just a single license for something, 208H would be the vehicle for that. 208A is for Oracle software and maintenance. It is software only for that contract. And then we have another cybersecurity contract for Tanium software, and that is our 208T contract. So we just want to kind of add a caveat here for our cybersecurity. We are in the process of evaluating new bids for cybersecurity services, which just opened earlier this month. And we intend to release a cybersecurity solutions bid probably late this year or early next year. And that will replace some of the existing contracts we have, like 208M for endpoint and 208T for Tanium. So that's going to be our all-encompassing cybersecurity product solutions, and look for that bid to come out later this year. So, oh, okay, Code Blue. I don't believe the Code Blue. I know what you're talking about on campus phones. No, that would be a different type of device than the two-way radios that we're talking about. So those are not currently under a state contract for the Code Blue phones. But great question. Now that you told me, I know exactly what you're talking about from being on campus. Okay. Any questions on the software contracts? Okay, Kevin, you want to go ahead and come off mute?
Hi, good morning. I apologize if this might seem rudimentary, but I haven't been with county government long, so I don't know the best way to use these resources. But for example, the Apple contract, I see it's listed there. What would be the best way for someone like me to make a purchase? Is there information about a contact for Apple, or?
There is the great questions too, and so we have like a slide a little bit on how to use them at the end. But to jump ahead, if you go to the contract web summary, which if you go to our state contracts page from the link that we'll provide when we'll provide everybody this presentation, you go to the contract and you click on the web summary, and that contract is going to give you information. For Apple specifically, you will get, because it's direct with Apple, they're a little unique. You get an account with Apple and then you do your quotes through their system, but it will give you access to that and their pricing. But there's instructions on the site for, and thank you for adding that to the chat. That'll give you the information you need and instructions on how to order. And that's the same thing for all these contracts. So, but great question. And if you have questions as you're trying to access these web summaries or any issues, questions when you're trying to order, feel free to reach out, email the contracts administrator as you're using them, you have any questions on how to use them, or you can also reach out to me as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So for telecommunications contracts, there are 3 of those that are available. The biggest one we have is the 915A contract, and that is our cellular telephone service and equipment. That's going to be AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and US Cellular. There are instructions on that account, on that web summary about reaching out and getting an account set up with these vendors and having your cell service activated. And we say cell service, it's morphed a little bit because devices are not only just cellular phones now, there are some tablet offerings that you can get through this contract as long as you're getting it with the data plan or cellular plan. I think they're all called data plans now, but you can get the equipment as long as you're getting it with the actual plan at the same time through these vendors. So there's information on 915A. Another one we have, and this one is a little unique. It runs through our DIT services, telecommunication services group. It is our 7215A structured cabling. And so that is for telecommunications cabling, installations, move, changes, and repairs. And those are inside of buildings and outside of buildings. So that contract is actually facilitated through our telecom department. And there is a link, if you have a request for that type of service, there's a link on that state contract web summary that'll take you to the SIT team that facilitates it if you need those types of service. So there's instructions on that web summary on how to use that contract. And we also have our SIPs trunking, which is basically the SIPs or voice over IP hosted voice over IP services. That is a statement of work or SOW based contract, and that is distributed amongst the awarded vendors. There's 3 currently: AT&T, CenturyLink, and Segra. Your SOW gets distributed and you get pricing back, price quotes from all of them, and you would select the one that best meets your needs from a requirement standpoint or specification standpoint, as well as a pricing standpoint. So that would be our other telecom contract. Okay, James. Okay, and then last category we have are our services contracts, and there are a lot of services contracts that we offer. And that's a good question, and I think I'm going to answer yours, Tiffany, here in just a minute. Services contracts we have now. So we have a 920S IT services, and this is for statement of work against statement of work based services. They're time limited, fixed price engagements. There's various categories like application development, IV&V. They do electronic content management if you need somebody to digitize your files. ServiceNow categories, cloud implementation categories on this contract. So there's quite a few. These are those statement of work based. We also have our 920M managed print services contract, also statement of work based. And there are multiple vendors on this contract where you can reach out with a statement of work to get the vendor that best meets your specifications and needs for that contract. We have the 920M and media monitoring services. And the only way I can describe this contract, I guess the easiest way to describe it is if you want to see who's saying what about your organization, whether it's good, bad, or in between, that's what this type of services is used for. We actually are in the process of awarding a new contract here, but I know in government that's a big thing, that people want to know what's being said about their organization. So that's what the media monitoring services contract is. We also have the 918A security assessment services, and that's for multiple types of cybersecurity services like penetration testing, things like that. There's multiple vendors on it. And a little note again on this one, this contract 918A is going to be replaced by the bid that we just opened for cybersecurity professional services, and that's the one that's under evaluation. As soon as that contract is awarded, the 918 contract will terminate and be replaced by that contract. We also have our what we call our 920 IT SS contract, which is short-term staffing. This is just for people. So if you need to hire technical support, desktop support, developer, or something of those natures, and you need a person to come help support your staff, that is our IT short-term staffing contract. It is already used by some local governments, but it's a great resource to get people in. It goes through our managed services provider who manages the program. You basically put in a task request for a position you need. They send it out to the vendors in that category, and you get resumes back, and you can set up interviews based on that. But it is a great solution for that. And last one for services are third-party maintenance services for hardware, IT hardware. It's got two vendors on it, Park Place Technology and Service Express. And that's an alternative for your, going directly to an OEM for maintenance services, which can be extremely expensive. These offer a more cost savings alternative to going direct through the OEMs for that type of support. So let's see, before I move on, I see a couple of questions on the, I saw something on the POTS contract. We are actually working on a replacement contract. That bid is going to be released. And I'm not sure specifically for POTS, but I know that for communication lines, POTS lines that are in elevators, and on fire alarm systems in buildings, that is a bid that we're going to be releasing here probably within the next week to 2 weeks. It's going through the final approvals to post. We did used to have a state contract that covered POT services, but that was sunsetted at the end of last year because of lack of usage. But that is something that if you need to get information on. I think we could put you in touch with our telecommunications team for options there or ideas there. So I think we could, Jamie, your team, maybe have them connect with Mark Cook's team or somebody on that team that might be able to help them out with that.
Absolutely. And I'll just,
So,
Tiffany had mentioned that in the chat, and that's absolutely what we'll do. If there's anyone else that needs more precise information on any of your POTS lines or any of the TDM sunset things, it is very popular work stream and contract. So feel free to let us know in the chat, and we will put that on our follow-up list to connect with you all on. Thank you.
perfect. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, next slide, James. Okay, so this is to touch back on what I was talking about originally. How do you use our IT contracts? So next slide, James. Give you a little overview here. So procedure. So as I mentioned previously, we do have, each state contract has web summaries. And those web summaries are going to provide you specific instructions on how to use the contracts, what the contract term is. It's going to give you the awarded vendor and any resellers that they may have. It'll give you their contact information. If a contract is statement of work or SOW based, there will be templates on the site that you can use to solicit or send out to the vendors on that contract. So great information on those sites. We try to give you as much information as we can about how to use the contract and the information on who the vendors are. So that's there. There's also something that we have on our contracts. Not every contract has it, but we call it an abnormal quantity provision, or basically a large volume purchase provision. And what that means is some of the contracts, like one of the ones that typically does, I noted below, is the 204A contract. So it has a $75,000 abnormal quantity threshold or large volume purchase threshold. So what that means is if you're looking out on our website and there is one that has a large volume or abnormal quantity threshold, if you have an order that exceeds that amount, those requests should be forwarded to the statewide IT procurement office. And the reason we ask that you forward those is because we will go, and the contracts have a provision that says the vendors have to offer additional discounts for contracts that exceed this large volume or abnormal quantity threshold. And so our department will work with the vendors to try to see if we cannot get you or hopefully get you an additional discount. So you should submit those to our office. It's not a very long turnaround typically. We normally can get those back to you within about 3 business days. If we get to the last quarter of the fiscal year, it may be 3 to 5 just because we tend to get inundated by year-end requests. But we will work with the vendors to try to get you additional pricing discounts. Also, sometimes that when you're working on these, you may have a statement of work tied to those, especially if you're purchasing, say, under like a 204X, the IT infrastructure services contract. You may have a vendor who's doing migration or implementation services as part of this big purchase. So we ask that when you submit those to our submit to email, the statewide IT procurement office email, which is listed here, that you would include a copy of your agency request, the vendor quote that shows list pricing, and if there is a statement of work that you've received, which you only if applicable, go ahead and send that to us. That gives us the information that we need to review your request. For the statements of work, we always work with the vendors to make sure that they're following the terms of the contract and they're not trying to add like additional terms that are contrary to the contract. So we take a look at those just to make sure that the vendors are doing what they're supposed to be and following the contract terms. Any questions on this provision? Because we do get a lot of requests from local governments, but we want you to be aware of double check when you're purchasing and make sure that if the contract has one of these provisions, that you're following the rules of using the contract and submitting that to us for approval. Okay, and just a couple other kind of procedural things on these contracts. So our statewide contract terms are written according to state statute and our administrative code. So our contracts, you're using them in accordance with those terms and conditions. You can't modify our terms, but sometimes local governments may have specific terms required by your agency. As long as those terms don't conflict with the terms of the state contract, you can request or work with the vendors to add these terms to the contract. And some of those are kind of like with we have that on a statewide level with our Health and Human Services Department. They have specific HIPAA type terms that they will add to any procurement that they do. And the vendors are aware of that, so they accept it. Department of Revenue has specific terms related to federal tax law, and they have to add those. So if your local government has some kind of specific terms, you can have specific delivery requirements, that's fine, or terms kind of specific to you, maybe around security or even like HIPAA compliance or something. You can definitely work with the vendor to include those types of terms as long as they don't change or conflict with the ones that are in the contracts already. But I wanted to let you know that that is an option, and it really is at the vendor's discretion as to whether or not they're going to accept these terms. They don't typically reject them unless they're something that is contrary to what they agreed to with the state. So I've seen them do this. So if you do have terms like that and you need to include them, reach out to these vendors and make sure that they're willing to accept them, because I think more times than not, they probably will. So I just wanted to let you know that that is also an option. Jamie, go ahead.
And I love your advice. I wanted to ask a question. Do you recommend that? Because typically, and tell me if this is not accurate for the local governments, but that terms and conditions cycle is usually one that takes a good bit of time compared to other parts of the cycle. So is that some of the guidance you were recommended to talk to the vendors, early on about those if you do have special agency requirements?
Definitely.
Okay.
That's a great question, Jamie, because that is, of all things, and you probably all of you are aware of this who work in procurement, that the terms and conditions, especially on the IT side, are the longest piece. So go ahead and ask them up front if they're willing to do that, because that will tell you whether or not you can use the state contract as a vehicle versus having to go out and do your own solicitation. So that is probably one of your first questions to ask. Say, hey, we want to purchase this under this 204A, but we need to add terms relating to this. Definitely reach out and see if they're agreeable to it, because they'll tell you. And that way, you can proceed with the state contract versus having to go out and potentially do your own bid on it, or look for an alternative type of agreement to use. Any other questions on how to use the contracts or any of the abnormal quantity provision at all? Okay. All right, so there are a couple of our state contracts that have special provisions on how you use them. And I kind of touched on this a little bit with the 920 ITSS short-term staffing contract. That contract, you will work with our managed service provider, who is a company called CAI, and they will work to get your organization set up in their Vector, and that's Vector vendor management system, so Vector VMS system. And that system will allow you, as I said previously, to submit any of your staffing requests into the system, receive the candidate resumes, invoices are generated. You set up, there's these vendors are, CAI does make sure that background checks are done. That's all part of the state contract. I know this contract itself has become something that local governments have started to use more and more as they may have a limit on filling full-time positions and maybe have a need for only a short-term period of time for somebody and they're not able to get a full-time position. This is a great vehicle. It's one of our biggest contracts that we have. Strongly recommend it if that is a need that you have to work with, and the information on the site will put you in touch with CAI and they'll get you set up on that contract. Our IT 920S IT services contract, that is a statement of work based contract. And it does require that you submit the statement of work to a minimum of 5 of the awarded vendors in the category that you're looking for the service under. You can select all of the vendors, more than 5, but you have to select a minimum of 5. Right now, one of those must be a hub vendor or the historically underutilized businesses. So that is a requirement of that contract. The contract for state agencies, they have to submit those requests through our office for review for the statements of work. Local governments, you do not have to submit the SALs for our review, but you do have to follow the minimum of sending it out to 5 vendors. We do ask that when you have a statement of work and you're ready to issue it, that you reach out to the contract administrator, and that person will give you the most recent, you'll let them know which vendors you want to submit the SAL to, and they'll give you the most updated vendor contact information. Because that information changes a lot, we just ask that you reach out so you have the most current, and then we can also verify that you're following that minimum 5 vendor requirement that's under that contract. And then as I mentioned, for structured cabling, the 939, actually it's not 939A anymore. I think it's 7215A. Sorry, that was the old number. That contract, those requests are submitted through the NCDIT request fulfillment, and that email is provided there. That is facilitated through our NCDIT telecommunications department. So they'll work with you and work with the vendors on anything that you may have under structured cabling. And just an update on our upcoming state contracts. And this is really, I'm only taking you through the end of the year. We have quite a few that we're working on for after the first of the year, but these I know we'll have out. 2 bids are under evaluation right now. So our cybersecurity professional services bid, that's going to replace the 918A security assessment services contract. That is currently under evaluation. We did receive a lot of vendor bid responses, so it's going to take us a little bit to get that one awarded. Media monitoring solutions, that will replace the current version of 920N. And that one we are hoping to have awarded by the end of this year. So we are completing our evaluation and negotiations with those vendors. We have 3 bids that we for sure are going to have out 2 in the very near term. One is our communications lines for fire alarms and elevators, and that's to replace the POT solutions that are now in the elevators. And that contract should be released in the next couple of weeks. We also have a debt collection services contract that is a new contract for our office. Not sure how much of that would be used on local government side. It's got 2 components. One is going to be for student debt, which I don't think would apply to you guys at all, but also the other part would be just other debt, like other state debt. So it may be something, if that's something that your organization is using, that will be one to take a look at. And then we are also working to combine our printer contract and our managed print contracts. So we are replacing our 204D and our 920M contract with a new contract that will combine both of those purchase and managed print, purchase, lease, and managed print under one new contract. So those should be, all of those should be released by the end of this year.
Debbie, I did see a question from Tina, and I can actually chime in on this. It's about having to ask software license vendors to remove T's and C's. whether their own or a reference to a convenience contract on a quote. And when I had this all the time when I was at NC Central. So, and it's also something to be aware of, but we would always ask the vendor in their quote to reference that the contract was based on list the contract number that the pricing was based on, and that those terms and conditions apply. And then you always have to be careful with vendors, because they call it the battle of the forms, but vendors will always try to sneak their terms and conditions in. So sometimes they want to say in their quote that the terms and conditions would apply. Sometimes I would cross that out, or I would ask them, like I said, to indicate what that the contract that we were referencing applied. The other thing that I notice vendors will do, and you have to be careful here, especially if your procurement team is onboarding vendors, but in the onboarding documents, a vendor sometimes would want you to sign something that said, by signing this, you agree that only our terms and conditions can apply, and they supersede any other terms. And whenever I had a vendor that did that, and I mean, it happened so much that I would always cross that part out, because if you go back and forth with the vendor, sometimes that could take months. I would just cross that part out. I mean, ask your legal team about doing this, but it was okay with our legal team. I would cross it out, and then I would just say state terms and conditions apply, something like that. But you see that happens all the time. And when that did happen, 9 times out of 10, the vendor they took the form as it was. They were happy to get business with us. And every so often we'd have to have a negotiation, even though even though our contract has terms, and then the vendor agrees to accept your PO, which has terms. So that can be tricky, but it's called battle of the forms, and vendors will always try to find a way to sneak their terms and conditions in there.
And also, just to add to what James said, something that if you are buying under a state contract, we've already negotiated the license terms and conditions with this vendor. If they try to put anything on there, otherwise, tell them to reference the applicable state contract number and put something that says that this purchase is subject to the terms and conditions of state contract 204X or 208S or whatever, because as part of our negotiations of the state contract, we've negotiated those license agreements, and I have seen them do that. And every time we make them take that out. We'd make them take it out and reference the overarching state contract if you're using a state contract. So I would strongly recommend that you do that. When we see it, we tell them we have the vendor remove it. So great questions. Any other questions on any of the state contracts?
I have one quick question, and it's about y'all's awesome newsletter, because you kind of foreshadowed this is just a little bit of a preview of what's coming over the next couple of months, and there's probably a lot of goodness coming after that too. So I immediately thought of y'all's newsletter. How can people sign up for your monthly newsletter, just in case they did want to stay in touch about some of these contracts, just to know when they got updated and so forth? Is that something we can help them get signed up for? Or
I think so. Bob Blatchford, who is our communications guru, he's on the call. Bob, can you maybe put your email in the chat or let them know how they could sign up to receive the newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely. I will. Yes. Yeah. And I think
Okay.
everybody will enjoy the newsletter. It's very informative.
I'm gonna find the link for them on the website and put that in the chat. But I love your newsletters, because it keeps me posted on all the good stuff y'all are tracking on, since it does sound like this is kind of just a little bit of a preview. So that's good to know.
Bob,
Definitely.
also, if you can give me that link as well, when I send out the slides and the recording, I can also put that link in that email as well. Looks like Kevin has a question. Kevin Smith?
Yes, a quick question. Who determines who the reseller that's awarded the, for example, Microsoft contract? Is that the state, or is that Microsoft that determines who carries that contract?
That was a competitive bid, and the state selected the vendor based on a competitive bid. So we did a bid so Microsoft lets you have a reseller for their license agreements. So the state does, or in that situation, did a competitive bid, and the vendor was awarded. Really, primarily for this one, it was basically the best discount off list percentage offered for the contract. So those contracts are ones that we are looking or to rebid in soon, and there will be some more services added, so it'll be more of an RFP and less of a straight discount off list, but it is the state that determined who the reseller was.
I know that there's a lot of chatter on the email distribution list about how a lot of organizations are unhappy with the reseller and are looking to and have found ways to move away. Should we send that feedback to someone on your team?
You should. We also have, and we'll provide this in a link, but we also have on our website, if you ever run into using our state contract vendor performance issues, there is on our forms on our website, somewhere where you can fill out a vendor complaint form, because we don't know about the issues unless you guys tell us about the issues. So we actively encourage you, if you're running into issues with these vendors and having problems, please let us know, because you're our users, you're our customers, and we need to hear that from you if you're running into issues or have performance problems with any vendor on any of our state contracts. Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome.
you.
And I'll say this is a focus for DIT, and I think everybody, strong negotiations, vendor management, maximizing our spend, just really amping up our maturity on all these fronts. So it's a great question. And one thing I'll mention is we do an annual business value assessment survey, and it's about time for us to do this again. We did it about a year and a half ago with our local government stakeholders. And in that assessment, we ask them questions. We'll ask you questions about what kinds of state contract vehicles would add value that maybe we don't have. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that kind of annual assessment that we'll be running here at some point soon to really get some additional input to fuel what we're doing on a procurement and contracts front. So all of the vehicles that we have are going to meet your needs and your new needs that are coming up. That debt collection one sounds cool. I've never heard of one of those being needed. So it's an indication of our changing needs. So I just wanted to let you know that'll be an opportunity to give us some guidance as well.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, it is 1 o'clock. Any other last comments or anything, Debbie or James, before we end?
No, the last thing we had was we were just going to click you over to show you. We do the IT contracts, but the Division of Purchase and Contracts has your non-IT. So we also provided a link there just for informational purposes. And I think that was it for us, unless you had any other questions. We're so grateful that you guys could join us today, and hope that what we provided you is going to be helpful. But feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. Tamara, you had a question?
Yes. First, I want to say thanks so much and say hi to James. We worked together at North Carolina Central years back.
Yes.
Yeah. My question was about some of the cooperative agreements, and I don't know if this is maybe the space for that, but if there is a possibility where maybe some space can be created for some of the cooperative agreements. I know, like in particular, we use the NC State has a multimedia convenience contract. So I guess the question is, has the state ever thought about maybe creating a space where at a minimum, other governmental entities can download their contracts? I don't know if you have to vet them or how much you have to do, but where they're kind of in one space that's more convenient for all of us to be able to access them. Does that make sense?
It does. So part of the thing about using cooperatives is we have to make sure that any cooperative is following our state procurement rules and state statutes. And we also have to, before we can really say, oh, you can use this contract, we do participating addendums, and we have mandatory terms that we have to add to them from a statewide perspective. Local governments may not have to follow all of those things when you're using cooperatives. So for us to say, unless we have an agreement like we do for Apple and mailing equipment, where we've actually created a contract participating addendum, we can't really say, yeah, you can use them without that being in place, I guess would be the way. But
That
you
makes
guys
sense.
certainly could. But we are looking at cooperatives as options where it's convenient. They're not always the best pricing we've found. So we try to make sure that the contracts we have the best terms for our users and the best pricing. But that is one of the things that, as a local government, you certainly can look at those and see if those would work for you. But from the state's perspective, we can't just, I guess, say bless them unless we have really reviewed the terms
Have you
and
vetted them?
potentially put our terms in there. So
Absolutely.
exactly.
That makes sense. Okay,
So
thank you.
Well, thank you, Debbie and James. I cannot tell you how beneficial this was to me, and I work here. So, and I hope that everyone else felt like it was beneficial and helpful to them as well. We will share these slides, and I'll share it out via email, and feel free to share this information. This is helpful for any local government agency, as you can see. But thank you again, James and Debbie, for your time. I feel like we would probably need to do this again. This is not a one-time thing, so we be ready for me to contact you again. So thank you again, and everyone have an excellent day.